How's it going, everybody? Great Say Geek here, and today I just want to share my thoughts about Lord of the Rings War of the Rohirrim. I saw it earlier today. I've had several hours to think about it, and I just want to give my thoughts. Now, if you clicked on the video, you saw the thumbnail, you probably know what my overall opinion is going to be on it. However, I kind of want to break it down a little bit and just talk to you guys what I honestly think. Let me start by saying, like most people are saying this in their videos, which makes sense. I'm a Lord of the Rings fan. I'm a Peter Jackson movie fan. I'm a book fan. But I got to tell you, just for transparency, right? I'm more of a Peter Jackson movie fan. It's not because I don't like the books. Obviously, they're legendary. I'm just not much of a reader. I've watched those movies so many way more times than I've read the books, you know. Um, I love being in that world. I love what Peter Jackson and his team were able to bring to the screen. It's just a wonderful world to be in. And on top of that, I like the Hobbit movies. Do they have problems? Absolutely. Not saying they don't, but I enjoy being in that world. And I've watched The Hobbit probably more than most people on this planet. I'm going to be bold and say that because I don't think that that's hard to beat. I also, this is different from the Peter Jackson Warner Brothers, universe, but just so you guys are aware, I do not like Rings of Power. Okay, I hate that show. So it kind of lets you know where I stand as far as I love the books. I love Peter Jackson's movies, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. The Lord of the Rings is my favorite trilogy of all time. I think they're the greatest movies ever. I think they'll probably be the greatest movies in my lifetime. But that's just me. Going into this as well, I've seen reviews out there, and some of them are pretty negative. Some of them are just like the film's okay. Some of them are, hey, it's really great. It's kind of all over the place. And I think it's going to depend, at least for how you guys feel, just on what you're looking for and just what interests you and what doesn't interest you, like anything, right? There are Lord of the Rings fans out there that do not like this movie. There's Lord of the Rings fans that do. I'm not going to name drop any channels or anything like that. I'm a nobody, right? I'm a small channel. Even if I was a big channel, I'm one person out of the billions on this earth, right? I'm nothing special. But there are people that I trust as far as their reviews that I usually, if they don't like it, I usually don't either. And I kind of got both sides of those reviewers that I trust, that some liked it and some didn't. So I was really conflicted going into it of like, okay, is this going to be a really so super woke film? Are they just doing it to, femalize Tolkien and just, whatever, all the stuff that you guys are probably aware of and hear all the time. Which I'm generally against, right? I don't like woke stuff. If I feel like it's woke, I don't like racial and gender swapping of characters that don't need to be swapped, or it doesn't have any relevance or destroys the world. I genuinely don't like that stuff. And the reason I'm bringing this up before I really get into the movie is because I want you guys to just understand where I stand. I'm not a movie reviewer. I'm not a critic. I'm just a normal dude who goes to the movies, sits his butt in a chair, and wants to be entertained, and don't want to feel like I'm being talked down to or just wasted my money. Probably like most people, right? And especially with Tolkien's works, I didn't want to feel going into this like I felt with Rings of Power, where I just felt disgusted. I hated it so much. And I didn't feel that with this movie. And when I went into the theater, I think my expectations were lowered because of what's been said and because of the reviews I've seen. And I kept waiting through this film. There was one little moment where it really started to like, okay, what's going to come next? Like, there's one little moment where I was like, okay, this is obviously very forced. It's kind of checking a box. And I was kind of waiting for the rest of the film to be like, okay, where is it going to really fall off hard? And that never happened. I was actually engaged with the movie. I didn't think it was too long. I guess if you look at it critically, there were probably some things that could have been cut down, but there's actually stuff I would have preferred to be added into it. But generally it kept my attention, and I enjoyed the 2 hours that I was in the theater watching it. I'll also say in this as well, because I think it's important, I'm not going to deep dive into everything the movie had. It's not going to be a full spoiler review, or impressions, I should say, but there will be some spoilers. I'm not going to shy away from what I want to talk about. So if you haven't seen it yet, you don't want any spoilers, maybe come back to this. because there's plenty of reviews out there that don't have a lot of spoilers. But I just kind of want to be honest and genuine. So I wrote down some bullet points just to make sure I cover what I want to talk about. But after seeing it one time, there's a lot of stuff that I'll obviously forget. And I'd have to see it again to really have it sink in. So let's go ahead and just jump right into this, okay? Let me start off simple, and let me just talk about the big elephant in the room, I think, for a lot of people, especially in the Tolkien fandom, is this movie woke? Is this movie girl bossy? And I guess that depends on what your definition of woke is. I think everybody has a similar definition, or a different definition. So for me, in this film, because like I said, being what's woke is going to be different from everybody. But for me, this would have been woke if I felt that Hera, because I understand the source material, she's an unnamed character, and she's not even really a character in the original work. She's more of a plot device, not really a character. She's just there to paint this picture of an arranged marriage, that Freka wants. She's not really a character. And so to make her a character is different, right? It's something that raises the question, like, why do this? Are they doing it just because she's a woman? Like, would they do it if it was an unnamed son? Would they still follow the perspective of that son? And that's really the question, is if it was an unnamed son, would they still follow that character if the story was similar? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But they chose Hera, or chose this unnamed daughter, named her Hera, and she's the central figure of the story. At least she's kind of the eyes and ears of the story. And I think if they would have written, and I said if they would have, foreshadowing a little bit, if they would have written her to put down her brothers, her father, made them weaker, made them feel like they're a bunch of fools and she's the only intelligent one, make every guy around her is this, like I said, just a fool, I would think that was a little more woke, especially when they're characters that are generally not seen as that, even though the story's really small, right? It generally probably would not should feel that way. If they made her just beat up on everybody, she's this superhuman, can never lose, super amazing fighter, just can beat up on anything and everyone, has really no weakness, I would probably say it's a woke, quote unquote. It's a weird, I don't really like using that term, but people know what you mean when you say it. And I don't think they do that in this film. I thought they were going to, and I didn't feel that. I felt that with a lot of stuff. And like I said, there's a lot of reviewers out there that when they say something is a woke film, it usually is when I watch it. And this one wasn't to me. Hera, even though she was a central protagonist, Helm was still just as much of a central character. And she doesn't really have, like, through most of the film, her father, like, literally tells her she's not fighting. Like, you're not going to fight in this battle. Like, you don't belong out there. You need to, like, I want to keep you safe. You're going to stay here. She doesn't really have these crazy, she has a couple moments where it's like, okay, it's a little over the top and maybe a little unbelievable at times, but it doesn't put down anybody else. Through most of the film, especially in the beginning, you're kind of seeing the story unfold around her, and she doesn't really do a whole lot in the sense of she's not this like badass, like I can beat up anybody type of character. She seems more grounded in where she probably would be at that time. She doesn't, at least from what I remember, she's not bossing her brothers around. She's not bossing her cousin around or her father. She very much is in her place in the beginning of that film. She shows some cleverness. There's, like I said, this is kind of where we get into a little bit of spoiler, just saying names and saying things that happen, but a lot of you guys probably already know that stuff's coming. In the beginning, her first like moment of kind of like where she does something a little bit not crazy, but just, something cool, is she kind of uses her wits to take out this Mumakil that's kind of rampaging. And she doesn't really fight it herself. Freylof, her cousin, I forget what he tells them, but he basically tells them to, it's kind of a, have them get away or something. And he charges head on to this, to the Mumakil and like takes his sword up and tries to basically gut it. And he ends up falling off his horse and doesn't look like it worked. Maybe it did, but it didn't really have an effect. And Hera has this idea because there's like this, basically these Krebine have picked this Southron clean, but she has like the horn. They kind of recognized earlier this was like a beast, look maybe like a Beastmaster, and she ends up sounding the horn. And the Mumakil kind of goes after her, which she leads basically to the Watcher. This, if you watch Lord of the Rings, right, you know what I'm talking about. And Freyloff kind of mentions a scene like, doesn't she know what's in those woods? And it's like, yeah, she knows, and that's kind of where she's leading with this, to go to the one thing that might be able to take this Mumakil out, which it ends up doing, and actually does kind of in a semi-brutal way. That's one of those scenes, if it was a little longer, I'd have been like, man, I kind of feel bad for this animal. You kind of feel bad for it anyways, but it's like, yeah, it's pretty brutal. But she doesn't like engage it. She doesn't single-handedly take it down. In fact, later on, her brother actually single-handedly takes down a Mumakil. So that part, that's what I'm talking about, where it's like, she does this a lot, where she has moments where she does a really good job in what feels good for her, what you would expect. She doesn't take away from really her siblings or anything. And her siblings and her father are really the only notable characters, on Rohan's side, really, and Freyloff, I guess. So yeah, I know this might end up being a longer video than I anticipate, because I ramble a lot as I try to collect my thoughts, but it is what it is. And she has some moments in the second half, right, where, well, let me, I don't know if it's the second half. When Edoras is sieged, she ends up killing someone, and it's not done in like, she's so like unstoppable, this amazing warrior. She kind of gets her butt handed to her a little bit, and it's only really through the help of her horse and her on her feet thinking that ends up taking him out. And it seemed really good. Like, it just seemed like okay, this is totally believable, in this setting. And then it's, when it skips forward to really after her father dies and her brothers die, is really the moment where she steps up and has to do something, and kind of becomes the character that tries to lead, or be a leader at Helm's Deep, or the Hornburg at this time, when nobody else can. There are other men there, there are other soldiers there, but everybody's like giving up hope. They're all, afraid, and she, as the daughter of Helm, kind of takes that mantle, or takes that responsibility to be inspiring in some way, to try and figure out how to save the people. And she has a fight with Wolf. Well, I guess rewinding that, she ends up, this is kind of the time before Helm dies, where he's like becoming this, legend, right, among the enemy. This, people think he's a wraith, he's beating people up with his bare hands. Where she kind of gets out of the castle trying to find him, and she comes across some orcs and this like snow troll looking creature, which Helm, by the way, ends up having this like kind of badass fist fight with him. It's like really, like, this is one of those moments with Helm where you're like, damn, dude, this dude is intense. And she ends up killing the troll, but she ends up killing him by throwing like one of the orc spears through its head, basically. And then Helm proceeds to like smash it in with a rock, with a boulder. It's pretty epic, and it makes sense too. Like, if I was Hera, I'd want to help my father, and I'd absolutely like try and take that thing out, especially if your father's fighting with his bare hands. This thing that's like 5-6 times stronger, it seems, than he would be. Even though he holds his own, and it's very anime-ish, and we'll talk about the animation, but it is cool. I found it to be pretty cool. And then later at the end of the fight, like I was saying before, she ends up fighting Wolf. And yes, she ends up taking him out. And there is a moment in that fight that's very anime-ish. That's pretty crazy, because it looks like she jumps over him. like somersaults over him. Which it might be the camera angle. Maybe she didn't. She just like maybe did it over his weapon or something. But it's still pretty crazy, and not something that would probably ever work in live action. You know, it was very much an anime-ish thing to do. And that was probably the one moment in the whole film where I was like, all right, that kind of takes you out of it a little bit. But yeah, but the fight seems like the weirdest thing about the fight initially is like she goes out in like a wedding dress to confront him, and the story plot there is he wanted her to be his bride, so she's kind of like, he wanted a bride, I'll give him one, and it's kind of it's kind of done as an insult to him, and but it's freezing, you know, she's probably super cold. It's like it's probably not the thing you should be wearing, but she fights him with like a sword and shield, and Wolf just has a sword, so she does. And I'm not like a medieval expert combat, but she does have a bit of an advantage having a shield. And so some of the fighting, I'm like, okay, I think she does have a bit of an advantage, even though he's bigger and stronger. That she does have a shield, which will make blocking his attacks a lot easier. And she does end up kind of beating him. Freyloff ends up showing up with like the rest of Rohan, which I'm skipping over a lot of story points. I just kind of want to really focus on Hera and just try my best. Guys, I'm not the best at articulation, so you'll have to forgive me, but I just didn't find anything really that she did too much to be like where I was like, yeah, this is super woke, or it's like it's putting the men down. Like I think she was actually, I think I liked the character for the most part. You know, I thought she was actually written better than I anticipated them writing her. Maybe that's not saying a lot, but it was better than I thought. There was one moment that had me kind of eye roll, and that's in the beginning when the marriage is proposed, and she ends up talking to Wolf alone, and she ends up telling him that she doesn't want to marry him, and she says something along the lines that, I wish to marry no man. I don't know how else you would interpret that. Maybe she wants to marry an elf. That seems pretty obvious that she's not into dudes. Which, here's the thing with that. It doesn't do anything the rest of the film. She's not out there flirting with the ladies or doing... It's like a complete throwaway line that it seems like it's just there to check a box and be like, hey, see? A little diversity check, even more. But there's nothing done with it. It just seems completely pointless. Like she could have just said, I didn't want to marry you. I don't want to marry the Gondorian, that is being arranged for me. I don't want to marry either of you. She could have said something like that, and it would have come across way better. It wouldn't have changed the story at all. And it just seemed a bit forced. And that was the one thing that was like, are you kidding me? And that's really where I started with this film. Like, okay, here it goes. This film's going to get real crazy, and I'm not going to like it. And they end up not doing anything with that, which I did appreciate. Which, by the way, this is definitely a film. If you have kids and you're okay with them watching Lord of the Rings, this will be a great film to take with your family too. It's wholesome. There's nothing crazy, or it can be violent, but no more violent than Lord of the Rings is. And there's nothing that's like, you're gonna have to cover your kids' eyes. At least I didn't think so. There could be some stuff with the animals that maybe not. It just depends on you and how you want to be with your kids. But I figured that was important to note. Let me talk a little bit about the story. I was originally recording this to break down a lot of the story, but it was just getting too long, so I decided not to, and really summarize just my thoughts on the overall story. I thought the story was done well here. It's not exactly like the book or the appendices or whatever you want to say, even though there wasn't really much there to begin with. But it does follow the major points there. Helm is a badass. Helm does some really cool stuff in this story. Helm does really cool stuff. His sons, they're not in it very long, but what they do, they don't seem less important because of Hera or anything like that. They do cool stuff. They do some cool stuff. They're good characters. Even Hera has her moments, but the story falls pretty much the same thing, you know. Obviously, they take a lot of liberties for the film, but I actually enjoyed the story. I didn't feel like anything was undermined. There were some things that I kind of wish were like the original story. Like I think, um, what's the oldest son's name again? I keep forgetting. Haleth. You know, they could have made his death. It was still impactful, but they could have made it. You know, I think the way it was done in the books is a little bit better. Um, but he still kind of goes out the same way, or at least in the same location. Um, you know, it follows similarly. You know, I don't really have much to say without getting into, you know, an hour long of breaking down the whole thing, but I enjoyed it. You know, I thought it was good. It had some touching moments, it had some really cool moments, and I didn't really feel like anything dragged on. I think a lot of people felt that way. I didn't really feel that way. I actually wished there was more to the movie. I think they could have shortened some stuff, but I think some stuff could have gone with an addition, you know, especially with some of the fights. I thought it was reasonably done. Um, I was actually impressed with how they were going to tell it, because one of my worries was like, okay, they're going to make Hera queen. You know, Helm's going to die, his sons are going to die, she's going to be the queen of Rohan. It doesn't end that way. Freylof ends up being king like he is in the original, and she kind of leaves because Freylof has a conversation with her at the end of like, you know, it should be you, you know, and she's like, no, I never wanted the crown. It's always been better on someone else, you know, type of thing. And she had gotten a message from Gandalf, because Gandalf wanted to talk to her about the orcs early on who were like looking for rings. You know, Gandalf being the only one concerned about Sauron and the rings. Um, and so she kind of leaves with the Shield Maiden to go and do that. And you don't really know what happens to her, obviously, because she's not a real character, and um, you know, you'll never know, right? It's part of the story of like you'll never hear about her, you know, in any legend or anything. And of course, and Freylof is king, so it kind of follows what it should as far as that goes. Um, but yeah, it was. I thought the story was pretty entertaining. You know, had some cool action sequences. Had definitely some anime tropes. You know, some stuff that would not work in live action. That again, you know, it works for the film. And I thought it was done pretty well. I thought the characters, kind of touch on the characters again a little bit. Helm was awesome. I was worried that Helm was gonna not be as cool and not be as relevant because of Hera being the main character, but he's probably the best character on the Rohan side, you know, the quote unquote good side. He's still really cool, and I liked his character a lot, and I actually liked Hera's character a lot. I liked her more than I thought I was going to. I thought I thought they were really gonna make her annoying, and she wasn't. You know, she seemed very grounded and normal. You know, um, she had some weird moments with her. I think I touched on that earlier too, but for the most part, she was a good character. Helm's sons, they don't have a time to develop. I will say, they probably could have had more time to develop, but even Hera as the protagonist doesn't have a whole lot of time. You know, she has more than her brothers, I will say, so she does obviously get more time. But the sons were cool, and you know, they, even for the brief time that we got to see them, I don't think they were lessened either. And Wolf is Wolf's kind of one dimensional, but he wasn't bad either. He was a good villain. He was a villain consumed with rage. You know, all reason was gone with him. You know, he's someone who his dad, in his eyes, was murdered. He was exiled, which you don't see this on screen, right? But it's, you can assume with Wolf being raised by Freka and the, you know, the time period, you know, the just the culture they have, he probably grew up not liking Helm already and following his father's footsteps of kind of agreeing to this plan, because I think he's always loved Hera. You know, it's like a win-win for him. I get to have Hera as my wife, and probably we can scheme and whatever to get the throne. You know, I don't think he was ever really a good person. At least as an adult, and I think that starts to show because he's just frustrated and angry, and ends up wanting to take out all of Helm's family. You know, kind of like Azog, I guess. The line of Helm, he just wants to take them all out. Um, but he was okay. He served his purpose as the villain. Um, and he's not really. I don't think he's really an empathetic villain. I think he's just a straight up villain. You know, you can maybe see some empathy there as far as just being born into a family and a circumstance that kind of morphed him that way. But he makes his choices. And again, General Targ, his kind of advisor and general of his armies, was a really good character. Brings up great points to Wolf, and kind of as you as the audience are thinking the same thing, like do this, and Wolf doesn't do it because he's so consumed by vengeance, and Wolf ends up killing Targ, because Targ basically at the end is like, I'm done, like I'm not following you anymore, basically, and so Wolf ends up killing him. But he was a good character. Freyloff was, he looked cool. His design was cool. And in a way, he was like, man, if this guy had more screen time, he'd probably be my favorite character. But he doesn't have a lot of moments, and which makes sense, I guess, because I don't think he probably had a lot of moments either in the original or the source material. But he was still cool. He was a cool looking character when he did some stuff or when he did show up. He just, the way they designed him, the way he carried himself was very regal, very like, he holds himself with great countenance, and he was cool. He was a cool character. Hera's shield maiden friend was cool. I think the characters were actually done pretty well. I don't really have a problem with any of the characters. They serve their purpose. I guess if you want to sit back and you just look at like criticize character development, everything, you'd find issues. But someone like me who's just sitting back and watching, I think they all do pretty well. And what's funny is after watching this is kind of side topic that doesn't really have anything to do with the film, but as someone who collects the Middle Earth strategy battle game figures, it's like I was holding off getting any, and after watching this, I'm like, I would actually buy some of the figures that represent some of these characters, to have with my Rohan army. I liked it enough. So yeah, I thought the characters were really cool. They do some stuff in the show with, you kind of have those tropes that were kind of in The Hobbit, where it's like just throwbacks to the original, like some reminders of the original. Some people aren't going to like that. I didn't mind it. I think it's fine. Again, they have Saruman show up at the end, which was really cool. He has one line. It's Christopher Lee. It's really, it's brief but awesome. They reference Gandalf. They reference some things that like, like, hey, these characters, these things. And it was good. I'm sorry again, like I ramble a lot. It's pretty late for me right now, and I've re-recorded this because I didn't want an hour and a half long review. If you guys want that, I can always go in depth in another video and talk about stuff I was originally going to talk about, but I just wanted to keep it short and sweet. That I genuinely liked the film. There wasn't really many moments that just threw me out of it that I thought there was going to be. I was really, really worried with Hera that I just was going to find her insufferable like Galadriel in Rings of Power, and she wasn't. I actually liked that character. I thought she was, for a made-up character, I think they actually did a pretty decent job. I think they were respectful enough to us as the audience and used her well to tell the story, or to see the story through her point of view in some ways. And I would watch this again. I would definitely buy it. I would watch it again. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Like, would I watch it every time I watch Lord of the Rings? Would I watch this, The Hobbit, and Lord of the Rings? Like, would I skip this one? And I don't really know. I think I'll end up watching this one a few times over, but I don't know if I'll watch it as much as The Hobbit, just as a whole. Because it's a 3-movie overarching story. It's bigger. It's ties in more with Lord of the Rings because they're so close together in time period compared to this. But this one is cool. This is one I will watch again. And who knows? Maybe my opinion changes the more I watch it. But I've liked The Hobbit the more I've watched it, and maybe I'll like this one even more the more I watch this one. But I enjoyed it. I would still put it on par. Like, for me, the way I rank the movies if I were to give you a quick ranking, like my number one's Return of the King, Two Towers, Fellowship, Desolation of Smaug, Unexpected Journey, and Battle of Five Armies. This one kind of hovers around Unexpected Journey and Desolation of Smaug for me. I don't know in what particular order, but it hovers around that area. So it's definitely, oh, and Rings of Power would be like so far into the earth that it just gets disintegrated into the core. Yeah, this movie's kind of somewhere in there. And I think a lot of people, especially if you're going into this movie like I did, with the influence of a lot of certain streamers or content creators, it may sway your opinion a little bit, but I think a lot of people will enjoy this. I think there are a lot of people who maybe look at movies and stuff that are very more critical, won't like it as much. Or maybe it's just, I don't know, they just can't stand a woman being in the lead in any capacity. I don't know. Everybody has their reasons, but it's kind of be up to you guys whether you guys like it or not. You know, this video is not meant to tell you guys to like it or to not like it. I'm just sharing my thoughts because I wanted to share my thoughts about it. And I know there's a lot of negative opinions about it out there. I'm not trying to dissuade any of that. I'm sure those who watch this are going to have some negative comments. You're more than welcome. It doesn't hurt my feelings. But I enjoyed it. And I would honestly, you know, I maybe I have to think about it more, but for me, I still would give this like between a 7 and an 8 out of 10. You know, I really did enjoy it more than I thought, and maybe that's because my expectations going in was lower because of reviews, and so maybe I was just more surprised. So that's why I'm giving it a higher score. But that's kind of where I sit on it. You know, it has some issues, but nothing more or less. Yeah, I actually think it probably has less issues than The Hobbit has, to be honest. But as a whole, it was good. It was good, I think. I know I missed probably a lot of stuff and kind of rambled a bit again. But for those of you who did stick through this and listen to this whole thing, one, I really appreciate it. I'm glad you're able to do that. But let me know what you guys think. Have you seen it yet, or do you want to see it? Are you holding off on it? Did you even know this movie was a thing? A lot of people did not. But let me know, and let me know what if you guys didn't like it. It's totally fine. Let me know what you didn't like about it. And if you did like it, let me know what you liked about it. And also, if you guys know what the actual budget of this film was, let me know. I think I was reading somewhere online that it was like 30 million, which is pretty low. This movie looked pretty good, even with that. So I know that I've heard that this was kind of a throwaway film for Warner Brothers because they needed to keep the rights, so they needed to get something out. But if that is true, this was done pretty well for probably the rushed movie production they probably had with it. It was done pretty well, I think, anyways. But thanks for listening to me ramble. Really do appreciate it, guys. Yeah, let me know what you think. And definitely way better than Rings of Power. Warner Brothers still has the better Lord of the Rings medium as far as TV and television movies. But yeah, that's gonna be it for me, guys. Thank you, and I will see you next time.